We made it to the end of another month of movies, so now it's time to reflect back on all 16 August 2025 releases I got to see and rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. And welcome, Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what movies you got to see last month and how would you rank them. This is just my personal list, my subjective opinions, and I'd love to see your thoughts on all of these, my opinions, as well as your own. Comment down below just that well. And taking in last place, we got My Mother's Wedding. Now, this one has a synopsis that lends itself favor toward my personal taste. It's a drama about these three estranged daughters that going in to meet their mother for her third wedding, and the way you follow about all the combination of these characters makes it intriguing enough. That's based on a true story about what this director has gone through, and there's some things, some deviation, and make it a little more dramatized. Now, unfortunately, with the combination of this story, while it does have its purest notes here and there, for something that effectively works in my favor, it's grounded, it's down to earth, it has Scarlett Johansson as part of the star power, and near the ending of the film, we do get a great long monologue from the mother that teaches a strong message that delivers it effectively and enhances the film toward its ending with a strong note of how they send all these characters off with a nice, lovely way of getting these three estranged daughters back together. There's things here and there that trickle along with a little bit of a mean-spirited way of introducing those characters, and that's what separates me from being able to connect with them to begin with, making it hard to get through until it reaches that point of the film, which unfortunately feels so prolonged. There's certain notes here and there that has its hints of enlightenment, but there's also disconnect to what they're doing, how they're sort of convoluting the story in a way that's not quite so easy to understand because everyone's separated to begin with. All the family is getting together, and so you're following along and trying to get to know all the deviation, the connections, and the relationships falling about along the way, which throws in a curveball of different people that come up later in the film, and just the way you're trying to follow about the mean-spiritedness of these characters that are separated to begin with. Maybe this is based on a true story, but it certainly has a start to the film that makes it hard to connect with them to begin with. And taking in number 15, we got Nobody 2, coming off the hot streak of such a fun action film of the predecessor. Nobody 2 came about to be a little bit of a disappointment, just a downgrade for the extent of going on a summer vacation. This dad that's more into the fighting game now that it's okay with his family. His son has influence of getting into a little bit of a fighting turmoil, and the way you follow about that makes sense. It has that sort of dramatic connection that I am a fan of the psychological tension that's going on within this family, that they sort of want to go onto this family vacation to rebrief and do their own thing, but the starting inciting incident sort of happens by a forced circumstance that feels unbelievable and suspending your disbelief just to make it happen, which leads on to a tension of all these different things unrolling throughout the film, which can create some fun action scenes, of course, just like you expect. Bob Odenkirk has a great performance. There's other things where it touches on a few nice family themes throughout, but there's also things that come about along the way that come out of left field. The grandpa that's played by Christopher Lloyd is still kind of distant. He's not part of the main cast, even though you made him follow along with the family vacation. So there's a separation between some of these distinct characters. You get a little bit more character progression from the villain out of this story, but still not really enough. It almost takes itself too seriously while also having a goofy tone all the same that just feels like a distinctly different tone that you want from this. You're creating this new environment, but it's not always following along with feeling like it has meaning. It may lead you to suspend your disbelief as you expect from what we got out of the first film, but sometimes it can be a little too far-fetched or dramatized and ground it too much to where it has this bit of indifference of what you're ultimately getting out of it. The message feel a little construed, things just feel off the rails with what you're ultimately feeling that it leads on to, just giving all sorts of directions for what this film ultimately could have been, and feeling like there also wasn't necessarily a story here to begin with. And taking in number 14, we got Highest to Lowest, the latest film I just recently watched for this list. And having watched the original just before this one, the way you're falling about this one as a remake is unfortunately struck by comparison if you've seen that original film, which is a master film on its own works. And this one, well, I can separate this story from that one. The way you're following about this story has its points of being a little bit too convoluted with its plot, the end of the first act, leading a little bit into the second act and third act. The way you're following about this is interesting because it's a new direction, it's fresh enough, it has enough to say this is a general template that you're replicating, but taking on its own story with the general vibe, taking on a New York setting, a different culture, a different modern age that certainly has its own technique, that Spike Lee as the director has his own style that's so much different than Kurosawa's. And so there is remarks about this film that I can give it credit for, and I love Denzel Washington, Jeffrey Wright within their particular roles, but unfortunately those are the two main cast members that shine throughout what this film does, making all of the side characters, even the wife, the children of the family, and the villain of the role, to be unfortunately kind of degrading, sort of going along with emotions, not fully getting an enhanced moment to progress what the momentum is this story is trying to express, which makes it unfortunate because it is a film that relies on quick pacing, fast action, and ways of creating this tightly knit dialogue. And even if you take away the action, the dialogue has to be a prominent point, just like the original progressives. And so with this, you just don't get necessarily all the things you need to, all the fresh ingredients that coincides with what made the original work so well. And even taking respect to what it's doing on its own things, there's things here and there near the ending that I won't spoil, a music video type of sequence that feels completely out of left field, feels like I don't know if it was real, and a choice to add an extra scene at the end of the film that completely like rearranges what you think is expected to end this film with, adding a happier note that goes against sort of the social commentary that this film feels like is a little bit forceful within what it's trying to express with its messaging, which takes away the whole point that some of this is trying to go about being, which unfortunately, while there is some good to be said about what it's trying to tackle as a whole, I just feel Spike Lee as a director really doesn't necessarily feel like the right fit to this particular film. Even if he does a good job directing it, the writing to it on its own doesn't provide him enough momentum to make this film actually work by the end. And coming in number 13, we got Jimmy and Sticks, this wild, off the walls, bonkers film about two guys within this one apartment fighting off these aliens from another planet that just merge down into their apartment. And it's just wild with the fighting sequences. Everything's dark, blacklit, and everything. They're snorting weed, they're drinking alcohol. So it's making the experience that much more trippy for them as well as us. It's sort of a handheld camera, so it's sloppy in a particularly intentional way, which sometimes can be so wild that it's not quite connecting with me. but at the same time, I embrace it for its insanity, for the ability to accept the sci-fi-ness of all the environment, making everything neon and blacklit, which just really enhances the experience on the big screen, especially that I watched it from. Just an energetic film from beginning to the end that really just goes about this weird conspiracy theories, people that don't believe him, but also things that it's mostly confining you to that one room, to that one apartment, leading you into multiple different ways of fighting off the aliens. These trippy different sequences with time jumps of one person being separate from the other for 30 minutes. And that's just part of the sci fi experience of the whole thing that I just highly appreciate as a whole. It's not a particularly great film, but it's schlocky in the best ways possible for all of its insanity that it fully embraces. Next up, we got The Naked Gun, which I watched the original trilogy prior to watching this for the first time, and being able to embrace all the spoof comedy I'm not familiar with. Normally, I don't lend myself well to comedies, but the spoof nature really works wonders, and with this one particularly, Liam Neeson is one of my favorite actors, and Pamela Anderson emits a good amount of chemistry with him on screen. Their romance, everything that goes on throughout, is just energetic and entertaining. The laughter and everything that's going about with its jokes lands so many times throughout. I wouldn't say it hits every time. And sometimes with spoof comedies, sometimes the magic fades away and it becomes so much that it feels like they're trying too hard at certain points. But that again goes back to whether comedy works for me or not. So still being able to enjoy it, I have it at a 3.5 out of 5 and still really entertained by all of the purest nature, the romance, everything. There's a couple random scenes here and there with a snowman that is coming alive and it doesn't even feel surreal and connecting with the rest of the film. I feel that could have been omitted, but at the same time, it's like a so dumb, it's good in some sort of situation, which kind of goes away from the spoof comedy-ness of what this film is emitting, but there still is that great amount of silliness from the verbal and visual comedy that's flowing throughout this film, so it's fully embracing it and acceptably will emits all of its comedy in a way that's stronger than a lot of comedies have been doing recently. So there's a lot to forgive with it. And of course, me being a Liam Neeson fan, falling about all that is just entertaining to be had as a whole, creating this fast-paced, energetic environment that while some of the jokes don't necessarily land at all in here and there points of the film, there's something about the liveliness of the film that's a great film to escape in. And taking number 11, we got Eden, a film from Ron Howard that really does wonders for the nature of this survival thriller taking place on this survival island. There's three different groups, a couple, this other couple, and this rich girl that has servants that are trying to establish a hotel there that has this distinction based on the true story. That makes it a little bit more attentive. That makes it a little bit more thrilling to the idea that you're noticing that most of this would be documented to be real with some bias to the survivors of this event that really brings about some surprises about the way. It's not always as predictable as you expect. It builds upon the setting, the environment, even though you're sort of stuck in one location. That also keeps you a little claustrophobic, needing to survive with all the necessary materials that are held at hand, still making it enjoyable to the nature of following about this great cast. Ana de Armas being the one that you're made to hate for being like a Karen type of character. We get Joe Lott, Vanessa Curry, and so on and so forth. The way we're following about all of these characters is just good for the groundedness of this film, while also being based on a true story. There's something more worth watching this film or that even though it's not necessarily one of Ron Howard's best works particularly, it's still a solid one that we've been getting recently out of the nature of what you can follow through with this plot. Sometimes it can feel a little monotone, and that's the thing that takes you from absolutely adoring this film for but there is an appreciation that with the way they may have adapted it from the source material, there may be something that is well credited for how well they effectively delivered on this film. And taking it next up, we got the Thursday Murder Club. I was highly anticipated this one as a crime mystery horror film. The way we're following about this cast is great for Helen Mirren, Pierce Brosnan, Ben Kingsley, so on and so forth. What we get out of supporting cast, just as good as well. And there's something that's enlightening about this cast when they get their scenes together. As a group of 4 Thursday Murder Club members, they do have a good sense of energy, a good sense of comedy that bounces back and forth between them. There's some parts of the film where you have to figure out secrets, certain things unravel about the way in a good manner, but what takes this film back a bit is just the way it sometimes focuses in on Helen Mirren's character, and she almost begins to solve all the cases on her own, including an extra tacked on scene at the end where there's another mystery that you don't get to know from the beginning that's just unraveling in a way that the whole Thursday Murder Club doesn't get to work on fully together. So it's an unfortunate case that still has its moments that work throughout the film, the cast being great, but certain things distancing and separating the cast from always being together just brings about certain things that just don't always work by the end. But I do like what they get with the motives of Thursday Murder Club, an added police detective that helps them out, and the detective work and everything that's falling about with the villains just as well. The motives are understandable for the means to an end with how you're following about this story, navigating it as a whole. So it's a solid crime mystery thriller that may not have the clues that make it easy for us to get involved with, but still does unravel to have the great answers that you want to expect when getting to the satisfying end. Next up, we have Sketch, which is a family-friendly, well-versed, imaginative film with this load of imagination while touching heavily on these themes of grief and loss, certain things that come about along the way, where this girl's drawings come to life when they throw it in this magic lake. There's no explanation behind why this lake does what it does, but taking the suspension of disbelief, it's fun to have that fun fantasy element, certain dark ties to the past of everything that's all unfolding from it, and there's something expressive within the way it touches on those bits of the grief and loss, because this family has lost their mother and the man has lost his wife, and how we unfold that throughout the story and how it expresses that at the end. Yes, it verbally addresses that type of theme, but it still doesn't feel like it's forceful within the way they mansplain it to you, the way you're accepting all these things, because it takes all of these points of development, all of these fights against these demon monsters, and everything is imaginative in a way that even if it's not super creative in the creature designs, it's scary enough to be still a kid's horror film that you can have your kids watch it and be able to enjoy the sensibility and the cleansiness of what this film is utilizing with its language, what the kids being good performers on their own, that I love the acting from it to a certain degree. There is a side character with a character that the kids don't necessarily like. That feels a little weird to add into the mix, but the development that can come about with that, even though slightly forced, still has a nice resolvement that can amend nice messaging within what you're taking out of this film. But what was most surprising coming from Angel Studios is just the well grounded ideas that even though they tend to do more faith-based films that don't openly speak on God and Jesus expressively, this one was not necessarily addressing that at all. It was just taking on a nice story that's more family friendly, yet you're still opening up the audience to being able to embrace all that the ideas have to unfold, have to express, and I think it does some wonders with the nature of the simplicity of the plot that does a lot with its themes. And taking in number 8, we got Relay, a well-grounded thriller taking on this sort of Skynet type of enforcement. This one guy that does things in order to protect people that call in, they don't meet together with the way the system works. But the navigation of everything about this one girl that is trying to take down this corporation that isn't doing the best things within the science lab goes about along the way with a way that builds upon the chemistry, the connection between this girl and this guy through the phone, that they're starting to get to know each other. And there's also the corporation just as well that's trying to interfere and come about along the way. And there's certain things where there's a controversial twist at the end for some people that will make or break for some people. I was kind of in the middle, and the only separation of what I embraced this film for, while it didn't particularly bother me what the twist did, it unraveled a reflection on the film past. And because of this one twist, there's so many small different plot details that could call some issues to if the villain plan didn't come to how it was, then there would be so many different things based on the situation of the connection between this one girl, this guy that's helping her out take down this corporation, that caused so many different things that when you reflect on this film, it really is problematic. So there is a stretch where I may have lowered my score, but at the same time, I did enjoy the film. It's just a problem if I watch this film again, knowing the twist for what it is, I may come about to become more aware of how problematic this film comes out about to be. But for my embracing, for my general experience with this film, it is a well credited. It has its thrills, it has its engagement, so it certainly does have a good marking on the general basis. It's just a question on if it effectively works based on the reflection and watching it through once more. And coming up next, we got The Roses, a divorce film coming from an adaptation of a book and the film The War of the Roses of the same name. The way I didn't know about that was kind of surprising that it was adapted from that, so I didn't have time to prepare to even watch that film. But coming about with this film, it's great with the performances of Benedict Cumberbatch, of Olivia Colman. Their banter between each other and their love chemistry works effectively. Jay Roach is a director that did this film, that he does drama as well. He does a mixture of comedy within, and so it effectively works in the wonders that I would have expected from it. It's not the highest highs, but it still effectively delivers on the emotions, on the comedic side, and it interblends those two genres together well, not interfering or feeling like there's a tonal shift that shouldn't be there. It effectively interferes with certain characters, the friendships that they have with these friends that help them along the way, where this is a story about the man that loses his success and this woman that gains her success on the same day, and with their marriage and how that interferes them leading on throughout the story becomes intriguing for the fullest extent of taking on, because in life you just don't know necessarily when things will take a turn for the better or for the worse. And looking at the kids just as well, they scatter them out throughout different scenes throughout the film. There is a point near the end of the film where they give them a statement that feels a little jarring to the way you're expecting everything to interact with the rest of the story, but still, it's okay when you're looking at the full explanation of the story, which all leads on to the end, which is kind of a shocking way to drop the ball on this film in a good way. But the way you've all showcased this film as a whole was a mildly entertaining one to be had quite so well. And next up, we got Americana. The way we're following about this film has a style similar to the direction of Coen Brothers as well as Quentin Tarantino, in the style that this is a Western drama and it's showcasing 5 different perspectives, showcased in 5 different chapters, and the way you're following about those characters is well distributed, and the way you're going about that is so distributed that you could almost want a little bit more, but it surprisingly evenly captures the attention to the minimum amount of motivation behind characters robbing this place, characters needing to rob the robbers, doing things with this Indian reservation, all other things that are coming about away with Sydney Sweeney, Paul Walter Hauser, their chemistry working together wonderfully, and things that just integrate itself well effectively throughout the situation. Some shocking moments, especially with the prologue, other things that just do wonders for the way you're jumping between different chapters, not always fully going chronological throughout the story, but going to an end that has a great shootout, a great fulfillment to what you're expecting out of this film, while still having the twists and predicament that you don't expect certain characters to not make it, certain characters that go about achieve their dreams, doing all these different things that makes it a wonderful adventure to come about along the way within this Western style drama that doesn't feel like your typical Western that you're embracing to begin with. And before we go into my top 5, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. Make sure to comment down below your top 5 or however many movies you got to saw this past month and how you would rank what you saw this past month. And taking in my top 5, we got the Freakier Friday. The way we're falling about this film, having seen all the adaptations of the Freaky Friday movies for the first time for previous to watching this film, it was enjoyable to the film that we're embracing for Freakier Friday, being a sequel that takes on Lindsay Lohan, Jamie Lee Curtis, and when their scenes are on the present, I am highly enjoying it. There's so much laughter, so much fun throughout, taking it for what it is, embracing it as a comedy that I am naturally distant to comedy sometimes, but this one effectively worked, had all the style I needed, and carried on the ambiance that even though there was a little bit mean-spirited things here and there with the new girls they added in with them in the mix, there's certain things when you're bringing in also Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan that there's a little bit of a convoluted mess adding in on that extra characters, being able to have to remember who swapped with who, and following about along the way. There's a couple just mix-ups with how everything wants to go about, who wants to get someone else married and break the wedding off for someone else. So there's a weird mix here and there throughout, but overall it captured what I wanted from this film and what I wouldn't have expected from this film going into the first Freaky Friday from 2003 for the first time, reading on through this. So it was generally a surprising one, even though I had it highly anticipated for August of 2025, just because the general basis of embracing the Freaky Friday movie for what it was and being able to enjoy most of the comedy out of this sequel all the same. And coming in number 4, we got Bad Guys 2, a big surprise, not even on my anticipated movies for August because of the nature that the first one was fine for me. I enjoyed it a little bit more upon rewatch prior to watching this film, but going into this one, it had a style that went into the action that was similar to the Mission Impossible films, taking on some of the innovative, the sleek animation style that was still enjoyable, just as fun. It may not have dealt so well with all the character development. You're not necessarily adding too much more into what this story has to do, besides adding in this new group of bad girls that combat against the bad guys, that adds in a nice mixture, a nice flavor that's constantly moving on throughout the film. There's questions of morality of if the bad guys want to be good, how that all unveils toward the end, and what that all unravels comes about with some fresh and new animation style that there's certain particular scenes that look way better than they ought to just for what I expect out of this type of film, out of what we got in the original. There's some shots of this film, some scenes that are so more sleek. And taking it onto space, taking all these different adventures, just leads you into all of these new environments, giving you some different double crossings, some different twists, certain ways to create an innovation to this plot that I wouldn't have expected otherwise, that it leads on to an expectation of a third movie that will be questionable how they continue on this story based on how this story ends, but there is still that matter of for what this sequel has to offer is so much more adrenaline and fresh for what I would have expected otherwise. Coming into my top three, we got the Toxic Avenger, to which I was not very much of a fan of the original 1986 version watching before this, so I didn't go into any of its sequels, but taking a big chance on what we got out of this original one. This is a fresh remake that whatever it did to change all its deviations, the things that I don't like about the crassness, everything that's over the top in some sort of way, while this carries some of those similar elements, it also feels more maintained. It feels like the events are chronological, we're clear cut, and being able to follow along with what this story has to hold. Peter Dinklage is surprisingly great where I otherwise don't necessarily care too much for his performance. What we get out of Jacob Tremblay is great for being the side character of being the son for this janitor worker that gets bullied, that gets pushed in this toxic pool that turns into the Toxic Avenger, and I love the looks of it, having that sci-fi appeal to me, adding in extra characters that changes the story while still paying homage to the original and its crassness, something I love about what it pulls off, being over the top, being violent just as well as the original, but still having that down to earth, dramatized style, having a father this son dynamic that works wonderfully, that has more motivation, the proper look at what we're taking out of it, and a malevolent villain such as Kevin Bacon playing that character that leads on to such an interesting appeal that I wouldn't expect it to pull out of this film. It's still quick, it's still crass, it still has all the things that the first one carries, but having all those deviations, I love this different appeal. It was just as funny as I wouldn't have expected. The way you're falling about all these characters, these deviations, these winning over plot designs, and taking it into the camp that's outside the city with this one random guy that's just a comedy to be had. Just adds so much unique elements that adding in certain things, adding in the idea that I was not turned against what all the original had to offer, this one just added it up so many levels to a standard that I wouldn't expect to have so high, not within just within August, but within the overall 2025 list just as well. And taking at number two, we got Weapons, the grounded horror film that's scary even more so because it's based on a true story. It has the slow momentum to its plot, but being taken place into 5 or 6 different perspectives, different plot developments. It's interesting the way it progresses its story, adding in these different perspectives, building the groundwork, adding in these different deviations about this one child that's left within this classroom when all these other children run away this one night at 2:17 a.m. and just having that pattern, having that creepiness to the haunting atmosphere. I love what we get out of the performances of Josh Brolin, of Julia Garner, and other ones that support the cast just about along the way. And being able to follow about the mix, there's certainly some haunting imagery, hilarious moments just as well that are intentionals for the sake of this guy that's high on weed. He's seeing these trippy and haunting images when going into a particular house that means so much more to the plot once you're following through with it, that really builds upon the stakes of the environment, building up about a great haunting aura, and seeing Gladys that adds in this maniacal sort of side to it as a whole just creates a weird sort of dynamic, but surprisingly has a great balance that effectively works within the plot narrative, within the dialogue that feels tight, that feels like it makes sense about the build up to the reveal, and while some people may have been able to predict it, it still had that magical reveal that effectively worked, that had the proper build-up, and a great payoff with all those kids going about to attack this one person that's the villain of the story. This is creating a great environment and a wonderful, interesting thing, but it's also devastating seeing that space on a true story and the aftermath that they had to develop it to something so much more with the kids that were haunted and captured throughout this event that carried on throughout this time. And taking it into my number one film of August 2025, we got Caught Sailing. Now, unlike all of other Darren Aronofsky's films, this one is different in his style. It's grounded. It's something that doesn't have this trippy imagery that is off-putting to some people. I am a huge fan of his other works, but looking at it as it is, it just is still adventurous. It's exciting. It has Darren Aronofsky's style when it is more of his grounded work, and taking it about this one guy that always gets caught up in the wrong situation for these Russians, for these Jews, that there's different patterns. They're blaming one another, doing all these different things, have to get out of these different situations, all of these different reveals that changes the story, the meaning to what we're getting out of the characters, to this one character played by Austin Butler. There's some shocking moments what we particularly get out of reveals that I won't spoil, but just the whole cast as a whole is incredible. Austin Butler, Zoe Kravitz, and all the things we're pulling all the strings to emotional moments, to inciting moments, to just gut-wrenching moments of things that come out of left field but don't deviate from what this film's purpose is, and having so many good surprises coming about along the way just creates this well built environment that feels just as grounded, just as believable for the nature, even though it's made up, unlike some of these other films I was just talking about. There's something about it that really well standardizes the natural longevity of what I love out of Darren Aronofsky as a director, as what he does with his style. And despite not having all these weird, trippy imageries that I'm personally appealed to what we got out of his work, there's still a groundedness to that I love all the same, because all of the storytelling is grounded, it's tight within its dialogue, and it expels its story within just the right means to an end. So that's just my personal ranking of all 16 August 2025 movies I watched, from my least favorite to my favorite, and I'd love to know your take down in the comments below about what you think of my thoughts on these films, or what you are suggested by what my recommendations to you may have enlightened you with. So make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already, to join in film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.